Hello, everyone. It is I, your hero from Heroic Studios Gaming. My third attempt at making this video because I kept screwing up the other ones. Hello. I hope this one goes. Hi. Welcome to yet another video made by me where I am going to talk about stuff. And this time I'm going to talk about the Dune RPG, which is right here. I actually have the physical book on this. Sometimes I don't have physical books. I have a lot of PDFs. And I do have the PDF of this as well. But here's the physical book of Dune the RPG that just came out. Just like 2 months ago, and it is the newest one made by Modifius. Wow, my shaky camera business. It is the newest one made by Modifius, and the reason it's important is because it was made in conjunction with the new Dune movie that's coming out here fairly soon. So this is why it's out versus another one called Dune something or other. I don't even remember, but this is called Dune Adventures in the Imperium. I think it was called like Agents of the Imperium. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The other Dune game doesn't matter that much, and it wasn't actually made in conjunction with anything. So this is important. It was handed off to Modifius, and I'm not going to go into detail about Modifius because they make a lot of things, so you should know who they are. And if you don't, you should really go look because they make a ton of stuff. But let's talk about the Dune RPG. Let's not take too long. I made another video. It was up to like 30 minutes, and I was like, okay, I got to slow this down. I got to go back and redo this all. But anyway, the Dune RPG book, disclaimer, it's only been out for a couple months. I have only owned it for 1 month. I have not actually played the Dune RPG. So that's a disclaimer. I'm just going to throw that out there because that may affect what you think about my opinions, because you might say, well, you've never actually played it, so your opinions are dumb, and I don't care. Well, that's fine. What's you, whatever. But then the other side is that the second thing is that there are some rules in this that I dislike. It's mostly about how the way the game plays out. There's a few things that are just wonky, and I'll get into them when we get into them. So let's talk about the book in general. This RPG is based on the Dune universe, and it covers a lot of the Dune expanded information. So if you haven't read any of the books, you're probably feeling like, well, maybe I shouldn't play this RPG. That's fine if you haven't read the books, because what they do for the first 83 pages is describe to you in detail, but yet very quickly, and so not like super boring and dry and really long, where you spend 80 pages reading about Fremen religious practices. They actually outline the Dune universe very, very quickly, from the Butlerian Jihad to the 10,000 years later, when we're at the point where everyone's at the transition between the Harkonnens and the Atreides to take over the planet Arrakis, which is supposedly when this game is supposed to take place. So you can play in the Dune universe, and because it gives you the background information for all of the stuff leading up to this point, you can also play at various different points in time, but you just wouldn't be part of any of the like major actions happening in the Dune universe. Because you'd be doing something else in some other past period. But if you're playing when the timeline is intended, then you're going to be somewhere around Arrakis or on Arrakis or somehow connected to Arrakis during the transitional period between the Harkonnens and the Atreides. And so that's the game. Sort of gives you 80 pages of explanation on the Lancerod, the Emperor, the Butlerian Jihad, the Thinking Machines, the Mentats, the Jenny Bezrits, the Sook Schools, the Swordsmen of Ginaz, the planet Arrakis, Spice Melange, the Spacing Guild, the other planets in the system that are important, like Getty Prime and like Kaitan and Seleucus Secundus. Yeah, it gives you a lot. It gives you a lot of information, but it sort of explains. And there's a lot of stuff because I haven't actually read the expanded universe of Dune. I've really only read Dune, and I really didn't want to read more, but I have the cliff notes of the other books, so I got the feeling for it. So everything, like all of the prequel stuff, is explained in here, which is really great because it helped me to understand what the heck was going on because I got lost. But then it also helped point out to me the very obvious connections between the Dune universe and the Warhammer 40k universe. Like, it's pretty clear that there was some borrowing of information there. But to be fair, Games Workshop has actually admitted to that fact. They admitted that Dune had a heavy influence on the Warhammer 40k universe, and that's pretty obvious when you're reading this, if you know anything about the Warhammer 40k universe. But anyway, so that's the thing it does first, and then it goes about explaining the character creation process and the rules as you'd expect it to, and then the assets your characters might have, and then like some role playing tips, and then it really gets into like game mastering, and then it has a pre-made adventure. One thing it doesn't have, which is really frustrating, is it doesn't have an index. And I say that from a guy who created an RPG that doesn't have an index, right? Like Maximum Apocalypse does not have an index. It is actually quite frustrating in this book that there's no index, because there's a few things that are super confusing. Like, for example, they chose, for whatever reason, not to include hit points. You have no health points, and I think that has something to do with Modifius's 2d20 system, which I am not tremendously familiar with, so that just might be how it is on all of the 2d20 systems. But there's no hit points. So a simple method, this is one of the flaws, a simple method for dealing with how you deal with fighting, which is pretty common in the Dune universe, would just be hit points, but they chose not to. So instead, there's this sort of wishy-washy kind of story element where you sort of determine story stuff about your character no longer being in a scene. It's okay for those that like playing free-formy RPG kind of stuff. This is fine, but for those that like crunch or like a very clear definition of you are now unconscious, this game does not cover that. So I was a little bit frustrated trying to figure out how combat worked, and I realized that it's not the way that I would think combat would work. Instead, it's like explaining how you're just out of a scene. Now, to be fair, I can kind of see why they did that, because they determined that you're basically going to do the same thing for everything that you do. So if you're doing sort of intrigue stuff or like espionage stuff or like combat stuff or whatever, it's all going to play out the same. So you could fail at a social challenge the same way you fail at a combat challenge, and the same way that you fail at a combat challenge where you're out of a scene because you're unconscious, the same thing happens when you fail like a social challenge. Instead, you were just sort of shunned and you're no longer part of the thing, or the person you're talking to like wins and then they get what they wanted. They that's how it works. So they were trying to sort of streamline the process of everything, so you didn't have to remember some rules for social and some rules for combat. So I can see why they just got rid of the health points, because they didn't want to have like intrigue points or some other business. So I guess I understand why they did that, but I don't think it's for somebody who's so used to having like hit points as like your thing, that would be hard for someone to get. But if you play games, I guess if you play games like Tales from the Loop or like Kids on Bikes or something where you don't have hit points, then you're kind of used to this idea that if you failed, then you failed and you're just out of the scene, right? But that's how it goes. So that's one of the things. Just spoiler, that's one of the flaws, in my opinion. But it's also maybe not a flaw for other people. But the coolest part about the book, I think, was actually when it sort of stated that you're all part of the same house. So house creation is part of character creation, and that's really kind of cool because it allows the players. And I've done this before. We did a ship creation for like Rogue Trader, and I played in the Game of Thrones RPG does the same kind of thing where you create a house and then you're all members of that house. You're all family members of that house. And so it made sense to me that they did it here too, because houses are really important to the Dune universe, because the Lancelot and the Emperor are basically the things like the Chom standings and stuff like that are all like big deals in the Dune universe. And so of course your character wouldn't be in the Dune universe unless they were part of some house. So that's why they did that as they did. So when you go to create a character, you're going to before you create characters, your group, your party, your group of friends is going to create a house. And so what you generally do is you'll choose like what type of house they are, whether they're a great house or a minor house or like whatnot. And when you choose that, then you sort of determine what kind of threats they have. Like obviously the greater houses will have greater threats. So you have like these bigger sort of things that come into play that the game master can toy around with throughout the campaign, right? So your rival houses will obviously be after you. But the more powerful the house, the more powerful the enemy, essentially is how it goes. The more things you can do with that house, like you have more domains, like those are areas of expertise, like whether it be espionage or farming or other things with particular classifications like machinery or products or workers or whatever, then that's what your house is known for, and that's what you do. And then the enemies have an equal like asset level and can sort of challenge you on basically everything. So that's how the game rules with the house creation, and that makes sense because now that you've done your house, everyone is part of the house. So your character is going to be whatever it is, an envoy or a like a warrior or some kind of like maybe they're the scion or like a leader or something. Whatever you are in your house, you work for the same house as the other players. So you guys are all individually trying to achieve things that are like your ambitions, your goals, but together you're also trying to achieve some kind of thing for your house, and you're going to try to increase like the level. Maybe you just want to maintain your standing in the Lancerod, or maybe you want to push up and get higher in the Lancerod and become a more powerful house. Whatever it is, the ambition of your house is like the goal for your group, and then your group is going to be playing out a bunch of other things inside of that. So I like that concept where like you've already sort of created a reason for all of the players to be together, and there's no argument for like why you're there. It doesn't matter what you're there because you're all part of the same house. So none of you will argue over it. Like, more than likely, the players are not going to play the ruler of the house, or at least they probably shouldn't. And the book even says that, like, they probably shouldn't. You shouldn't have one player be the ruler of the house, because then they're basically whatever they say goes, and that might be problematic for the other players, unless you have a player who's pretty good at not, like, stealing the limelight from everyone else, or letting the players shine even though they're technically their ruler, right? So unless you have a player that's able to play that role, you're probably going to be something more like the scion to the house who has absolutely no power yet. but could eventually, and so that will be that would be like the highest ranking character in the group. But that's what you do. So you create the house, and then you're going to go create your characters, which is also quite fun, but it's really loosey-goosey. A lot more loosey-goosey than I was expecting it to be. This game like has like these sort of kind of weird crunchy rules in places, but then it like goes through character creation as if you're basically sort of choosing things at will and random. I didn't like that as much, but it was still kind of fun. I created a character. I'll show you my character. Just throw him up here. This is Chalt, my Fremen dual fealty protector in the House Aurelius group. So the presumption I made was that my group is going to be playing as House Aurelius, and I didn't really create House Aurelius because I didn't need to. This is just an example character creation. But the creation process for the house involves a lot of like choosing the kinds of things. Like it's a lot of choosing stuff. Like what are we known for? What does our banner look like that kind of thing. So like you need a group to do that. So I just sort of made a fake house called House Aurelius, and that would probably be the house that I would use if I were to ever run a game. I would just be like, all right, guys, we're just going to choose House Aurelius. What is House Aurelius? Tell me about him. And let the players sort of do that and sort of speed along the process a little bit instead of having to like spend a lot of time trying to figure out what their name is, etc. But I chose Protector as my character, and I chose the concept as Fremen, and I'll explain why I did that in a second. So when you go to create your character, what they want to do, there's basically two ways to create a character in the Dune universe or the Dune RPG. You're basically going to choose the traditional method, which is the method I chose here, which is where you go create a full character. Seems fine to me. And then there's the create and play version, which is essentially, I think, the sort of quick start version / like running it at conventions kind of version of character creation, where you really don't choose everything. You just choose like the main things, and then you like throw the rest in as you go, so that like on the fly the character is developed, but in a way that like matches the story that's happening around the character, like why this person is in those particular situations because they have a particular set of skills or whatever, right? So that's sort of the way that they did it. So I went with a traditional method for creating Chalt, but like the quick method is super fast. You basically do all of the same steps, but you just choose one thing and move on. Like you don't like fully do all of the stuff in that section. So first thing you do is you choose a concept for your character. Now this is another flaw with the game. This is one of the things that I didn't like. I already told you that I didn't like the lack of HP. One of the other things I didn't like was that when it was like, go to create a concept for your character, it was like, okay, create a concept for your character. Here's some examples. And it goes, Fremen, Bene Gesserit, Mentat, Guild Agent, Sook Doctor, right? And those are like some major factions. And it's like, okay, those are the major factions. And then it goes, for those choices, you get this cool special trait. And you got like cool, like you have like to choose some talents. And it like makes it feel like you get like extra stuff because you chose those factions, but it doesn't clarify some of the other factions that it probably should have. Like the Sword Masters of Ginaz are supposed to be as equally as impressive as a Sook Doctor. So a family that has a Sword Master of Ginaz and a Sook Doctor, those guys are equally like high up on the like prestige role in the family, right? And so you're like, okay, well, why isn't the Swords Masters of Ginaz listed here as one of the particular concepts? And like, if I chose that, what would like a trait come from that be? And like, I originally was actually going to create a Sword Master of Ginaz, and then realized that like there was no information on what kind of benefit I would get and stuff, and so I was gonna have to like wing it on the fly. And I was like, well, that would be something I'd have to talk to my game master about. And I was like, all right, so I can't choose whatever. Like the game sort of like choose something and then like you get some benefit from it, but it like doesn't tell you how to determine the benefits, and it actually doesn't tell you if you get benefits aside from these examples. So the examples have these special benefits, but they didn't actually explain that in the explanation. So I was like, all right, screw it, I'll just make a Fremen instead. So that was a flaw. That was like it's like you're gonna do a thing, but that doesn't fully explain that thing. And maybe that was just them future proofing, and in like supplements they'll have like more on the Swords Masters of Ginaz, and then they'll like, this is what you get if you choose that as a concept. Maybe that's what they'll do. I don't know, but I was a little disappointed in that because I had to essentially choose either a Fremen, a Bene Gesserit, a Guild Agent, a Mentat, or a Sook Doctor, and that was like my options for concept, which is dumb. Or maybe the people over at Modifius thought these are the most highest prestige groups, so everyone's going to choose to be one of these. I want to be a Sword Master of Ginaz, but whatever. So then after you choose the concept, you then are going to go ahead and like choose an archetype, which is just basically the stuff that you'd choose, like a protector or a warrior or a tactician or an envoy or an empath or a spy, that kind of stuff. Like you're basically your character. That's like, you're going to choose, okay, this is my character type, right? This is what I am. And that chooses, like, the archetype sort of chooses your role in the family, right? And it doesn't mean that you're going to be master of arms if you're a warrior or a sergeant or something, but it does mean that you either work for the master at arms of the house or you're working your way up to do it. I chose protector in this case, and it was part of a concept I started developing with this character, and I'll explain that in the end. But then when you choose that archetype, and it tells you what your primary and secondary skills are, which is important to note because all your skills start at 4, except for your primary and secondary. They're up a little bit. So your primary is going to be 6, and your secondary is going to be 5, and then all the rest are going to be at 4. And there's only 5 skills. It's battle, communicate, discipline, move, and understand. That's at the bottom of the character sheet right there. Right, it's at the bottom there. That's your skills. That's it. There's only 5. And so, like, it tells you what your primary one was, what your primary one is, what your secondary is one, and then you get 5 points to sort of adjust those. So you can adjust them however you want. So discipline was my 6, and then battle was my 5, and then the rest are 4. And so I threw 1 into that, 1 into battle, 1 into move because I wanted him to be faster, and then the rest into understand because I wanted him to be really good at noticing things in crowds and stuff. I wanted him to be, he's a protector, so he should be able to, like, notice when somebody has a concealed weapon and stuff like that. But I'll get into that later. Then it tells you, it gives you 2 focuses that are already preset by your archetype, and in my case, they were the resolve and self-control, both under discipline, which was crazy. But that's what they both were, and so it'll tell you these are 2 focuses that you already have because of your archetype. Now you get to choose 2 more. And so then you have to go choose 2 focuses. And focuses, all they are, they're just like focuses for the skills. It just means that you're really good at that thing. So in my case, I did short blades and physical empathy as my other 2. Physical empathy being the one where you can spot, like, people's dispositions based on their body language, which in the books translates to also noticing that they have hidden weapons and hidden agendas and stuff. So I thought that would be perfect for a protector who's supposed to be guarding someone in the family. So that would be the thing. And then, of course, short blades because he's a Fremen. Right, like, he's a Fremen. He has a Chris knife. He kills people. That's, like, his thing. So what the focuses do, and this is actually a cool concept for how they do the game. You're going to roll 2d20 for basically everything, and if you get under your skill number plus the drive that you're using to, this is the loosey goosey part of the rules. You are going to roll under a number, and that number is based on whatever drive you're using to explain why you're doing the action that you're taking. So if it's duty or faith or justice or power or truth, whatever it is that you choose, plus this related skill. So, like, if I'm trying to stab somebody because they're trying to kill my allies, and so I go with my duty, which I do not abandon my allies, and then my battle, which, is because I'm using a blade here, that would be 14. So I'm going to roll 2d20, and for being under 14, then I will get a success, and the difficulty will be set by the game master as like a 0 through 5, and so say the difficulty is 3, and I roll both of those are successes, great. Then I have 2 successes, but I needed 3 to beat it. It's like a whole complex thing. But anyway, what the focus does, right? So this is the thing. So say I'm going after a guy with my short blade, and I already explained that if I got under 14, I got successes. Well, this is where the focus comes in. If I'm going after a guy with my short blades, and that short blade's being my Chris knife, right? My short blade is my focus. Then any success is counted as 2 successes. So if both of my rolls are under 14, that's actually 4 successes rather than 2 successes, right? It doubles my number of successes. So that's a neat little trick there because, like I said, if the difficulty was 3 and naturally with my Chris knife I only got 2 successes, so I didn't successfully stab the guy, well, actually I'm using my Chris knife, which is a short blade, which is my focus, so actually I got 4, which means I totally stabbed the guy. So that's how the game works for the focuses, which I think is actually kind of neat. That's actually a really neat way to do it. It sort of means that, like, any success is a critical success if you have a focus in it. It just sort of means that that's your thing that your character focuses on, so they obviously do better at that. And then you pick your talents. The talents are essentially like feats. They're like special abilities. You get 1 automatically from your archetype, and then you get to choose 2. Your concept will tell you that you have to choose a specific one. So, like in my case, Bolster was the one I got for free, where I spend 2 momentum to allow an ally to reroll. And then Driven was the one I chose that matched the requirement I had to have to be a Fremen. So I had to have one of, like, a series of talents in order to be considered a Fremen. And it gave me a whole list, and I just didn't like some of them, and then some of them I really liked, and then this was the one I went with. Driven, where if I roll a 1d20 after using a determination point, which is a whole another thing, then if that number is underneath my discipline, then I regain that point. So essentially, I just get free determination points. I was like, that's cool. Technically, I guess I could have replaced bolster with driven, because the rules say that I can replace any of these mandatory ones, or the archetype one with any of these mandatory ones, if that's what I choose to do. And so I could have replaced it, and then I could have chosen 2 more, but I decided to go with that. And then I went ahead and chose dual fealty to explain why I have a Fremen who works for a Lancelot house, and is protecting the house, someone in the house, even though he's a Fremen, which theoretically doesn't have any alliance to any particular house. So that's how I explain it. He's dual fealty, because there is some examples of that in the book. There's like Duncan Idaho, who's both House Atreides and a Fremen, because he saved a Fremen's life. I figured to just kind of do the same thing, just kind of roll with that. And then you pick your drives, you set those. And like I said, they're kind of important how you prioritize them, because you have the 5 and they're going to be 4 through 8. So you go 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you'll prioritize them however you want. 8 being the most priority for you and 4 being the least priority for you. Those drives combine with your skills to determine why you're doing any action in the game. It doesn't matter if you're going to stab somebody or you're going to try to talk someone out of their money. It doesn't matter. You have to explain using the drive why that is the case for you. And then your drive statement there, if it aligns with what you're doing, then you have a little bit more that you can do with it. Like if your drive statement aligns with what you're doing, let's say I'm trying to convince a guy to tell me the truth. And I was like, only I'm like truth is the basis of all morality. So I don't trust the guy unless he tells me the truth kind of feel. I try to make that argument. And if I successfully do, then I can do something like use a determination point to give myself like extra dice and things like that. So those things go together, but those things you want to keep the things that you're going to probably use the most for your stuff as your highest. So in my case, like I said, the character is going to be a protector. So I chose duty, like he doesn't abandon his allies, but I also put justice as the top one. I must fulfill my oaths. So like it could be something like, well, why are you stabbing the guy? Well, because the leader asked me to, and because I promised him that I would do whatever he asked me to, or I have to do it. So it's like, okay, well then that's the way I be. So then I'm using justice instead of duty to stab a guy, right? You see where I'm going with this? So that's how that goes. Then your assets are pretty simple. You have 3 of them, and they don't have to be tangible. They can be intangible things. So that was an interesting concept as well, because like you normally think of assets as like knives and still suits and thopters and things like that, which is true. Those are definitely assets. But then also things like having blackmail evidence or having servants or guards, or someone owes you a favor, those are also options for your assets. And I thought that was kind of cool too, because I could say if I was making a character that was like the scion of a house, I could put like guards as my like asset. Like I always have like a couple of guards. Then that's a thing that I can use. Like someone attacks me, I can use my guards, right, instead of my crysknife, right? You see where I'm going with this? So like this is actually kind of cool that you could have intangible objects as well as tangible objects. So in my case, I chose a crysknife, obviously, because I'm a Fremen, and crysknives automatically have a quality of 1, which is I get a +1. So actually trying to stab a guy with my duty, so duty 8 plus battle 6 plus my crysknife, which is 1. It's now 15 that I have to roll below. You see? So that's cool. Still suit, obviously, so I can survive on the deserts of Arrakis, because that's a thing. And then I have a water bond to House Aurelius, which I can use as an asset later. Like if someone tries to keep me out of something, I can be like, oh, listen, I got a water bond with the ruler of House Aurelius or whatever, and use that asset as like a thing. Or I mean, like if I'm at a dinner party, for example, and they're like, why is this Fremen here? I can be like, well, I have a water bond to the Lord. Then see this asset come into play for the social encounter I'm having. See, so that's how you make a character, and that's basically how you play the game. So you're gonna roll these 2d20s, and you're gonna figure it out. The only things that are interesting is that like when you go to then there's the last thing where you do finishing touches, where you choose an ambition for your character, which is some thing. Then you choose those traits up there, like you put them based on the stuff for your character when you created them, and now those are the things that you play out. Like if your trait applies, then you use that for stuff. Like you can use that, and the house has traits too. You can use momentum to sort of use the house traits in play if it's applicable. Like if your house is a house that always finds out the truth, and you're in a social encounter and you're trying to find out the truth of a situation, you would use that trait and it would come into your benefit, right? So you gain momentum. This is the thing that exists in the 2d20 system made by Modifius, and in this particular case it applies here. If you ever succeed in action, so that time where I explained that I got 4 hits and I only needed 3, or 4 successes and I only needed 3 to beat the challenge to be able to stab the guy, well, that extra 1 became momentum. I can either bank that and put it into a thing for the rest of the group, or I can use that to trigger something. Momentum can be used. How did I wrote that down? So momentum can be used. There's momentum, determination, and assisting to give you extra dice. So I can use momentum to buy an extra die for like a roll that I'm doing. I can use my determination point to buy an extra die. I can use like somebody. I can assist somebody doing an action. Excuse me, an extra die, which is the D20. If I said that, like if I roll under, etc. Right. If so, with the momentum, it buys me extra dice, but it can also be used to trigger a house trait in a scene if I need it. I can use 2 of them to create a temporary trait if I need it for the scene. I can use 2 of them to create a temporary asset, so like a knife falling on the ground, and I can grab that and stab a guy. Or I can use it in obtaining information about a particular subject. Each a momentum point that you use gains. You can ask a question of the GM, right? So you can do like cold readings on people. That's kind of cool. But then determination is kind of the same. You have a point. You start with 1 every time. You basically you can either create an automatic 1, like you use your determination point to say you got a 1 on a roll, and so that gives you 2 successes essentially. You can use a determination point to re-roll a failed roll. You can use it to you can change a trait. It's like a weird thing. You can like change a trait to another trait temporarily. You can use it to get an extra action. So like you want to do 2 actions in the time on your turn then rather than 1. And of course, like I said, it buys you an extra D20. Now, there's another side to it. The other thing that I don't like about the game, this is another con. Oh man, I'm getting close to that same time limit from before. There's the other con that exists in the game. It sort of sets up the idea that the game master and the players are opposed to each other. And while I know that's not necessarily the case, and it kind of is for some systems, in the Dune system, it sort of creates the idea that the game master is going to try to resist everything the players do, which isn't necessarily good, but that's fine. The opposing thing to momentum is threats. You can choose, instead of using a momentum, to give the game master threat points. The threats are then used to be able to do stuff like buy extra D20s for NPCs, increase the difficulty of a challenge after they've already, I guess, determine the difficulty of a challenge, so you can change it on the fly if you need to. You can use it to remove traits that the players are using to give themselves advantage in a particular scene. They can use the threats to change an environmental or narrative change in the scene, so like all of a sudden like it's different. And then they can also use it to like trigger rival house actions that the players have to just deal with instead of being able to defend against. I found that to be really weird. That sort of plays out wrong for me. Like it makes it feel like the game master and the players are opposed to each other, but I understand why it exists, just to give the players some kind of control over what the GM does, because their choices allow the game master to put them in more disadvantageous positions. But it feels to me like they create like this like wall, and the players are on one side and the game masters are on the other, and that's not necessarily how a game should be played, but that is the feel, especially when it's called threats, right? Like, anyway. Lastly, the thing that I think was actually kind of cool for this game, because it wanted to play both the like combat and the social kind of stuff, they did this way of character advancement that I think is actually quite cool. And so I'm going to cap that off. That's how I'm going to end this, is just cap it off and then like let you guys decide whether or not you want to play this game. The character advancement is pretty simple. If you faced an adversity during the gameplay, then you're going to get a point of advancement. Like it's called what is it called? Advancement point? Hold on, let me bring up the character sheet real fast. I seem to have forgotten already. Yeah, it's advancement point. Yep. So they're gonna get an advancement point. So the kinds of things that I'm talking about is like if you lost a conflict, like if you try to got into a fight with a guy and you lost, you got beat up, you gain a advancement point. If you were in a social challenge, for example, and you tried to like have a fight with your like rival and in the middle of like a court, and you failed and they won and they made you look like an idiot, you get an advancement point, right? If you failed any kind of test or skill with a difficulty of 3 or more, like if I went to go stab that guy and his difficulty was 3 and I failed to stab him with my only 2, I gain an advancement point. So that's kind of cool. If I was in a situation where the GM used 4 or more threats against me or my group all at one time, whatever the situation was, and we succeeded in that, then we gain an advancement point, which is pretty freaking cool, because that does sort of set up that thing where if the GM is literally trying to destroy your group and using all the threat points that they possibly can, and you manage to succeed over it, you gain an advancement point. If you succeed in your ambition in some way, or you like in a minor way, you get 1 point. If you succeed in a major way, you get 3 points towards your ambition. Then that's how it works. You just get some points for that. And if you impress the group in some way, if you did some good role playing, or you had a great plan, or you did a funny scene, or whatever that, you gain an advancement point. So you get these advancement points, and then you spend them obviously on advancing your character. Like if you have 10 if you have 10 or more Advancement points, well, you need like 11 or more advancement points. You can up one of your skills. You can bump it up. And the number is like 10 plus however many times you've advanced it so far. So if you haven't advanced it yet, then it's just 10, right? But if you're advancing it now, then now it's 11. Or you had before, that's 11. You can gain more focuses. The number of focuses, the cost is the number of focuses that you currently have. So like if you have 4, which you automatically do, then to buy your first focus, you're going to need 4, and then you can buy another focus, right? Your talents, if you wanted to get another talent, another like special ability or feat, it's 3 times the current number of talents you have. So starting off in the very first time you advance your character, you will need 9 advancement points to be able to buy a new talent because you start off with 3, right? And then for an asset, you can take any asset that you gain temporarily for a scene, something that was in the scene, because of in theory, it goes away at the end of the scene, whatever that asset is. Like if you stole a knife from someone and you went to stab him with that knife, at the end of the scene, you don't get to keep that knife. It just kind of goes away narratively. But unless you pay 3 advancement points, and then you gain that thing. So if you were to like kill a Fremen and steal his crysknife in a scene, you don't have the crysknife at the end of the scene. But if you spend 3 advancement points, you do get that crysknife. You see how that goes? And then you can also do this thing like retraining, where if there's like a skill you're not using, you can swap. You can decrease it by 1, and then like spend half the number of skill points to advance a skill for another skill, and then you can advance that. Or if you want to change a focus or talent, like you're not using the focus or the talent, then you can swap it out for another one at half the cost. So if like a focus would be like 2 instead of 4 at the very beginning, you see, because you're like swapping one out for another one. And so there's this retraining functionality of advancement. But that's how you go. That's how you advance your characters. So overall, and this did reach the same length as the one I made before, so that was unnecessary for me to have made a new one, new video. But overall, the game has some very good points, but like I said, it's got this sort of wonkiness when it comes to like some things that I don't like. I don't like the idea that the game master and the players are like against each other and they're opposed, and so these threats come into play. I know someone will probably argue with me that that's not what they intended, but that is what it feels like if you're not used to that kind of thing. I don't like that the combat system is a little bit weird because they didn't want to put hit points in, so if you fail, you just get knocked out of a scene. Now, there's a whole thing about like extended tasks, so it's not just like one fail and you're out. You actually have like a couple of fails before you're finally out, and that's how they do it. But I don't like that the combat system is so not straightforward, where you take some damage and therefore you've taken enough damage, you're now out of the scene. I wish it was a little bit more straightforward, but it's not. I think, and not for mostly for when players determine whether or not they've knocked someone out of the scene. Like, it's obviously designed that like you just take down minor characters left and right, little NPCs that don't matter. But then like the big guys take you a little bit more time. That's how it's designed. But it does like feel weird when you don't know if you're doing enough damage, quote unquote, to like kill a guy, right? And you don't necessarily kill a guy, because the idea is that like you're unconscious, but doesn't mean you're dead, and so you could be captured, right? And then like the scene can continue. I don't really like that as much, and like the character creation, like I said, was a little bit wonky. There's a little bit of loosey-goosiness to it. That was a little bit problematic for me. But like I said, disclaimer, I haven't actually played it, so for all I know, this all plays out just fine in the game, and I guess I'll have to reassess my judgment of it in the future. But that was it. That's the game, and I would actually still, with all of those flaws, I would still give it at least 1 thumb, potentially 2. I don't know. Like I said, until I play it, to be sure, I wouldn't necessarily give it 2, but I definitely give it 1. It sounds like it's pretty fun, and like I do like the idea that like that creating my own house. Like if I wanted to write fan fiction in the Dune universe, then I would make a house using this house method, and then I could create my own Dune fanfiction, right? Like that's pretty darn cool. That's a great place to be with a rule book like for a game, because realistically, what are RPGs if not like joint character or joint fanfiction writing, right? Like that's what I feel. All right, so that's it. This is a super long video. I'm sorry about that, but I hope that you guys enjoyed it, and I will talk to you later in the future about other things. See ya.